President Grant, come in, come in.
Governor Oglesby. I wasn't expecting such a reception when I arrived here in Decatur. I don't know how your entire town found out about my arrival, but ever since my train came in, crowds have followed me everywhere I go.
Well, please come in and meet my wife, Emma. She's been anxiously awaiting your visit, and I must say I've told her many stories about you. Emma, I would like to introduce you to my good friend, President Grant. Grant, this is my lovely wife, Emma.
It's certainly a pleasure to meet you, Mr. President. I've heard so much about you from Richard. Although I have told him not to tell me too many war stories, they make me a little uneasy.
Well, the pleasure's all mine, Mrs. Oglesby, and I'm sorry that you had to hear some of those stories, but you know, the war wasn't all bad. There were times of laughter, though those were far and few between on the battlefield, but we did have some pleasant times.
My good wife has forbidden me from talking about the horrors of war, but I can't help but reminisce about the practical jokes we used to play or the laughter we shared around the campfire. Why, I remember...
Oh, no, more war stories? No, please, come and have a seat. I'll bring you some tea before the war stories start again.
Your tea, ma'am.
Thank you. That will be all for now.
Before we begin reminiscing, I do have a message to deliver to you from the Oglesby Lincoln family. I am to formally invite you to a dinner they're having in the late president's honor.
Oh, God rest his soul. That sounds like something his family would think of. You know, it's been 15 years since he died. I just can't imagine how hard it must have been for the children and Mrs. Lincoln. How is she doing?
Well, about as well as can be expected. You know, she never did get over the president's assassination.
You know, Grant, I was supposed to go to the theater with Lincoln the night he was shot. I wanted very much to be there, but I was simply exhausted from the several days on the train to Washington City. I was with him when he died, though. He was a good friend, and he was like one of the family. How is his wife and Robert doing?
Fine, fine. Everybody's fine. You know, Governor, I was just thinking on the train ride down here about the 1860 presidential election. Now, wasn't it you who came up with the campaign slogan, Lincoln the Rail Splitter for president?
Yes, yes. I supported Abe Lincoln in everything he stood for. In fact, it was our state of Illinois that was the first state to ratify the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. He had grand hopes for this country. He imagined a country that would work together and...
Pardon me, ma'am. Your advice is needed in the kitchen.
Oh, I'll be right there, thank you. President Grant and Richard, would you please excuse me? I have household duties to attend to.
Well, I certainly didn't mean to bring up unpleasant memories about the president's murder.
Well, they certainly are bittersweet.
I understand that you're considered quite the local hero here in Decatur.
Me?
They say that you're the American dream come true. That a person who started with very little and worked your way to the top. Success when life was against you.
I was lucky, that's all. Just lucky.
Well, it had to be a lot more than luck that made you the man that you are.
My dear fellow, the circumstances were in my favor.
Well, now that's completely untrue. From the stories that I hear about the famous Richard James Oglesby, you had to work for everything that you have. In other words, you're a self-made man.
It is true that I had to work for everything I have today, but I simply had no other choice. Have I ever told you about my childhood? Well, someday when you have a spare minute, I'll sit you down and we can dispel all of this idle gossip.
Well, there's no time like the present. I always say that I have time for a good friend and a good story.
Well, I'm not exactly fond of my humble past, but I'll share it with you now as a friend. When I was 8 years old, my father, my mother, a sister, and a brother all died in a cholera epidemic. There were 6 of us children left. The only adult we had left to us was a family slave named Uncle Tim, but even he did not stay around for very long. Uncle Tim was sold at auction for $400 to help settle our father's estate. Seeing Uncle Tim up there on the auction block, it was one of the saddest days of my life. I ran up to him and I told him that if I could ever afford it, I would buy him his freedom. After that, the 6 of us were split up and we went in different directions from relative to relative and house to house. But because we were too young to contribute much to the family, we were simply too many extra mouths to feed, too many extra children to clothe. By the time I was 10, I had learned to take care of myself. I began traveling with my Uncle Willis when I started my carpentry apprenticeship, and we went wherever we could find work, Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois. And we worked as farmhands when we weren't too busy doing carpentry. When I was 14, I came to Decatur and I settled in with relatives there. They bought a subscription for me to attend school, and that 3-month session is the only formal education I've ever had. Now, Decatur was just a small, isolated prairie village of a few hundred people in the late 1830s, but I managed to stay quite busy between carpentry and farming. Finally, one spring, there was talk of opening up the Sangamon River to barge traffic so that farmers could ship their produce to market. Seeing an opportunity, a friend and I rented 40 acres of land to dam a creek to form a pond, and we raised hemp to make rope for the river barges. But the pond water, in which we had to soak the hemp to separate the fibers from the plants, overflowed into a neighbor's farm and poisoned his horse. Although we made a goodly amount of rope, after paying for the farmer's horse, all we had to show for an entire summer's worth of work was $6.50. That convinced me that there had to be a better way to make a living. By the time I was 20, I had saved enough money to go to Springfield and study law under Judge Robbins, a very respected jurist. A year later, I passed the bar, and I even practiced law for a while in Sullivan. But shortly thereafter, the war in Mexico broke out. You and I served in that, although we didn't serve together, but you know the rest, and now it's history.
Well, I know that you didn't make any money in the Army during the Mexican-American War. How did you establish the Oglesby fortune?
Have you already forgotten our reminiscences during the Civil War when we became such good friends? Well, it was 20 years ago now. Let's see, in 1849, just after the Mexican War and a year after gold had been discovered in California, 8 of us rambunctious and adventurous young men from right here in Decatur headed west to make our fortunes in the gold fields of California. We staked a claim and were really quite lucky in our mining ventures. Although we didn't become wealthy by any means, we really did quite well. When I came back to Decatur in 1852, the first thing I did was keep my 20-year-old promise to Uncle Tim. My brother in Ohio had located Uncle Tim, and I sent money away to buy our faithful friend his freedom. Now, as you know, the Army doesn't pay its veterans very well, but it does give land grants to all of its veterans. I used my land grant, as well as some of the money I made in the gold rush, to buy property here in Decatur to develop it for housing. There were 2 railroads coming to town at the time. In 1853, both railroads had survey crews in Decatur, and by 1854, both railroads were under construction. All of the construction foremen and immigrant workers had turned our sleepy and isolated little Decatur into a thriving community with many new businesses opening up. There was a real housing shortage that lasted clear up until the Civil War. As it turns out, I was really quite lucky in the timing of my land deals. You may not have noticed it with all of the people waving at you, but the road you came this way on from the railroad station is named El Dorado. I named it after our gold mine in California. Another road named Cerro Gordo is named after the battle in the Mexican War.
Well, that is a remarkable story. You'd make the weakest person want to work hard in order to succeed. It certainly has worked for you. Oh, my goodness.
What is so funny?
You still have this whole thing?
Now, someday that is going to be a valuable historical item.
Who in the world would want Santa Anna's wooden leg?
Oh my goodness, what in the world are you doing with that old thing?
Mrs. Oglesby, did Richard ever tell you how we had a good laugh at Santa Anna's expense?
Santa Anna, wasn't he the leader of the Mexicans during the Mexican-American War? No, I don't think he's told me about him.
Well, Santa Anna had several kinds of wooden legs. He had some for riding a horse, and he had some for walking, and he had wooden legs for riding in a carriage. During the Battle of Cerro Gordo, he had to flee the battlefield so quickly, he left his carriage behind. And in the carriage was his roast chicken dinner and a box with 20,000 silver dollars in it and a wooden leg. And Richard got the wooden leg. And that's why he thinks it'll be valuable someday.
Yes. It was one of those times during the Mexican War when we shared true laughter. It was during the Civil War, however, when there was so much death and destruction. Even young boys, 10 and 11 years old, just innocent drummer boys for the troops. I would never want to see anything like that again.
Oh, you dear men. I just can't imagine what that must have been like to see the horrors of war. But I am pleading with you. You two men had the power to prevent this from happening again.
Mrs. Oglesby, your husband and I will do everything in our power to protect our families and our country from whatever may try to harm them. But if we have to fight in order to protect them, why, I'd be the first in line to battle whatever evil is out there.
Emma, those of us who have fought in war never want to see war again. It is not all of the glory that people think it is. But there are evil people in this world who will do whatever they can to take away our properties, our freedoms, anything, so long as it satisfies their greed for power over others. And we must do whatever we can in times such as those to defend our families, our freedom, and our country, or they could be lost to us forever. President Grant, would you like to take a stroll through the surrounding community? I know that I could use some fresh air.
Well, that would be delightful, but do you think we could slip out without being seen?
Certainly. We can go out through the servants' wing. Emma, will you excuse us? We are desperate for some fresh air.
Very well. Don't be late for dinner. The cook has prepared a special meal in honor of President Grant.
Could you bring me my hat and gloves, please?
Mine too.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Oglesby, I need to compliment you on your beautiful home. It is lovely.
Well, thank you. I'm very fond of it myself, although it is a little small for our growing family. I wonder if we'll still be here when our children are grown. What do you think? Do you think it will still be here in 100 years?
Why, Mrs. Oglesby, I'm sure this house will be here clear until the 21st century.
Thank you. After you, Mr. President. Emma, we shall return in plenty of time for dinner.
Very well, thank you. Well, I wonder if this house still will be here in 100 years. Will it look the same in the 21st century as it does today in 1880?